Hello my friends, welcome to my corner. A couple of years ago I went to a library and I was checking out their books for sale section, and there was a familiar spine that grabbed my attention. Not familiar because I knew about the book, but because it was one of those Penguin classics that I am always drawn to. So I looked at it. I had not heard of the author, I had not heard of the book, but I read the back cover description and it really resonated with me in terms of the topic that the book covered. So I was like, this is only $1. It's a Penguin classic. Okay, it's a topic that I'm interested in. I decided to buy it. Now it's only now, 2 years later, I believe, that I finally read it. I am talking about this book right here, America is in the Heart by Carlos Bulosan. So I really enjoyed it and I want to tell you about it. Let's start here with genre before anything else, because this book is really interesting in this particular aspect as well as many others. This is a hybrid text. So as I was reading it, when I started it, I thought this is a novel. That's how I decided to read it at first. But then at some points when I was reading, I felt like I was reading an autobiography. At other points, I felt like I was reading a book of history about Filipino Americans and their struggle for equal rights. Let me read you the back cover description, which is what grabbed my attention in the first place, and that way you'll have an idea of what this book is about. It says right here, the Filipino American classic about a migrant laborer who endures racial violence and struggles with the paradox of the American dream. So that gives you a very clear idea what to expect. Now I mentioned all of those genres, those three genres really. We have fiction, we have autobiography, we have history. But I want to say that this is not really a blend. It's not really a blend. It feels more like the text moves in and out of each one of these genres. So it's kind of like a fluid text. I would call this also a Bildungsroman. I think that is a very good label that we can place on it if we are going to use labels. We have here 327 pages. The story, or the narrative, is divided into 4 parts, and we have 49 chapters. And if you get this edition, which is the only one that I know of, the Penguin edition, you also get an appendix with some letters by Carlos Bulosan, in which he talks actually about the genesis of this text, that is America is in the Heart. So that's dealing with genre and also a little bit with structure. Let's talk about the setting now, and I mean that both in terms of the place and in terms of the time period in which the story takes place. So we are in the Philippines, and then also in the US. When we move to the US with the character, we are in the Pacific Northwest for the most part. He spends some time in Alaska and also in California. So that is the setting right there. And when you read the back cover description here, the first thing that it says after that part that I read you before, it says, taking place in a period and setting similar to that of Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath. And that is kind of like already conditioning you to expect certain things, if we are in the time of Grapes of Wrath. Carlos Bulosan was born in 1911. He leaves his family when he is 13 years old, and shortly after that he moves to the US. So basically, if we do the math, we are in the mid-1920s in the United States. Towards the end of the book, you hear about the fall of Bataan. So as you may know, that happened in 1942, and the book was published in 1946. So that gives you a very clear idea of the time period that we are dealing with. Now, let's talk now about the contents. Okay, what is this book really about? What happens in the story? As I told you before, it is divided into 4 parts. And in the first part, we hear, for the most part, about life in the Philippines, but in a rural setting. So that's where we are at the beginning. You can see there the importance of family, but also the struggle against nature, for example, heavy rains, floods, stuff like that. Tradition, also sacrifice. Okay, lots of poverty here, really, in this first part of the novel or autobiography or history, however you want to look at it. Our protagonist is called Alos, but then later on he's also known as Carlos, just like the author, and then also as Carl. He is one of 8 kids, if I counted correctly. So don't take my word for that, but that's how I counted it. And then first part, right, then we move to part 2, and that's where we move to the US with Alos or Carlos. And in this second part, what you see primarily is the character struggling to find employment and then just moving from one job to another, moving from one place to another, trying to escape compromising situations. He meets other Filipinos, including, by the way, two of his brothers. And this is something that may seem implausible, but this happens more than we know, when it comes to immigration and people meeting other people that they knew from the hometown or the homeland in the new place where they live. Now, the move to the US for Carlos or Alos represents a loss of innocence. This is basically what we have. Now, let me read you a little part right here that illustrates that, what I have just said about the loss of innocence. He says on page 137, I almost died within myself. I died many deaths in these surroundings, where man was indistinguishable from beast. It was only when I had died 100 times that I acquired a certain degree of immunity to sickening scenes, such as took place this night. He's referring to a specific event right here. Yet I knew that our decadence was imposed by a society alien to our character and inclination, alien to our heritage and history. It took me a long time then to erase the outward scars of these years, but the deep, invisible scars inside me are not wholly healed and forgotten. And he continues to describe the situation. This is what I mean when I say it's kind of a loss of innocence, this part, the move to the US. He experiences discrimination, but I mean violent discrimination, prejudice. He becomes a gambler at one point. He's also led a little bit into a life of crime. He encounters also socialism and leftist ideals. So this is all that he's experiencing. It's a kind of a social / political awakening for him, this whole move, what it represents. Now look out for the exact midpoint of the text if you are reading this. I mean the exact midpoint, like absolutely like physical, okay? Because this is a very important moment where he experiences an outburst against white people and also the loss of a character that is very important for him. He actually says, this was a turning point in my life. So it's not subtle at all, and it's included in the exact midpoint of the novel. That is part 2. Then in part 3, we encounter more violence. We encounter strikes also. So this is a part that actually made me think of John Steinbeck, but I'm going to say not as much The Grapes of Wrath as in Dubious Battle. Okay, so that is what we are looking at. And in this third part, he also meets a woman and her sister. Her name is Alice Odell, who is instrumental in his development as a person and as a writer also, because she introduces him to great literature. So I said before that this was a kind of a social / political awakening for him, but it is also a literary awakening, because this is when he encounters the examples that he is going to follow when he decides to become a writer, which is also in this part. And also, part 3 is really, really important because it is here also that he is diagnosed with tuberculosis. Okay, so we see him going in and out of hospitals, struggling with this very painful, and distressing health condition. Now, part 4, the last one, I see it basically as a continuation of part 3. We encounter more developments in terms of his illness, in terms of his writing, his desire to write, and all that. And again, towards the end of part 4 or of the text, we hear about the unavoidable reality of World War II. So part 4 to me is kind of more of the same if you compare it to part 3. We need to talk about the protagonist, because if this is a Bildungsroman, autobiography, creative nonfiction about a person, I think that is something that we do need to do. I would describe Alos as sensitive. Okay, he is kind. He is a person who has a big heart, a heart that is open to everybody. But he's also a person who gets angered by racism, by injustice in general. He's very passionate about that. So yes, he is kind, but he is not submissive. He has that anger inside him when he witnesses all of the injustice around him. He's also nostalgic. So I could definitely relate to this character being an immigrant myself. There's a little bit of a difference that I'm going to touch upon in a minute or two about his view of the homeland, when he looks to the past. But you can expect that to be a very important thing in a novel of immigration or an autobiography that deals with this. Now, something very interesting and that I have actually seen happen is that he develops a kind of a superhero slash savior complex. You know, he is going to go back to his country and he's going to educate the peasants and liberate them from their ignorance, that whole type of thing, you know. But one thing about him that we have to say is that he is aware of having that complex, you know. So there's just great introspection here in this text. Also, you know, I really liked this touch. Notice how the name changes. Okay, he's Alos at the beginning, then he's Carlos, then he is Carl. So it's very important to note when that happens and who are different people who give him his different names. And I love that because I think, you know, we like to think of ourselves as a unity, you know, as an individual personality. But there are, in fact, many facets to us, you know, especially if we experience changes like immigration, you know, like being uprooted and having to live in a different place. I see myself as different versions of myself as time passes, different iterations. And when I was looking at that, you know what I thought of? I don't know if you've seen that movie Moonlight, the one that won the Academy Award, where he also has, you know, the character, we see him in three different parts, three different stages of his life, when he is a kid, when he is an adolescent, when he is a young adult, and he gets different names or different nicknames. So once again, you know, different facets that make up the whole or the full personality that we have. The immigrant experience is another topic that I wanted to touch upon because, of course, it seems to be, you know, obvious. It's like the central theme of this text, and it's one of the things that I loved about America is in the Heart, just how it portrays, how it depicts the immigrant experience and different, I don't want to say stages necessarily, but different feelings or emotions. For example, at first you have that enthusiasm, right? The enthusiasm for the new land, the new place, all of the opportunities that it may hold. But then right after that, very soon in this text at least, you have that reality check, right? And for Alos, that is the racism that he experiences, the violence, the despair. Throughout the text, there is also a kind of perplexity, right? So it's like, okay, what is this place? What kind of place is this? Like, what kind of people are this? I want to understand them, right? I want to study them, to observe them, so that I can finally understand this place where I am going to live, this place that I am hopefully going to call my home. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention in this progression of immigration and feelings is nostalgia, right? Looking back to the homeland. This happens inevitably, very often, right, in a text that deals with immigration. But, you know, this is where there's a difference with my personal experience as an immigrant. Carlos Bulosan, or Alos, if you want to look at the character, he doesn't exactly see the Philippines, his homeland, as a lost paradise. Okay, it's not exactly that for him. So in this case, we have something very different to what happened to me. What happened to me was, you know, I had a very difficult time adapting to my life in my new home, in my new country. So immediately I started to look back and I romanticized everything about my homeland. You know, I forgot about all of the bad stuff that had happened to me in Argentina, all of the things that I didn't like about Argentina, and I focused on the good things. So my homeland became kind of like a lost paradise that I could return to. Not really here in America is in the Heart. So I was really, you know, happy to see something different from what I had experienced in this case when I read this novel or this autobiography or this book of history. This may seem obvious what I'm going to say now, but we need to touch upon it a little bit at least, and that is the theme, the central theme of America, quote unquote, as a concept. Okay, that's why I put it between quotation marks. The novel is obviously concerned with the concept of America and then with the reality of America, both things that you get here. The title is really self-explanatory, you know, America is in the Heart, but I wanted to share with you a passage here that deals with that. And what you're about to hear comes from Macario, one of Alos's brothers. He says, "It is fair to say that America is not a land of one race or one class of men. We are all Americans that have toiled and suffered and known oppression and defeat, from the first Indian that offered peace in Manhattan to the last Filipino pea pickers. America is not bound by geographical latitudes. America is not merely a land or an institution. America is in the hearts of men that died for freedom. It is also in the eyes of men that are building a new world. America is a prophecy of a new society of men, of a system that knows no sorrow or strife or suffering." So that is a very, you know, grandiloquent speech from his brother. And the novel is concerned with that kind of concept of America and also with the reality, as I was saying before. And the reality is the racism, the violence that Alos encounters when he moves to the United States. So this is the paradox that he is struggling with, as it says here in the back cover description, that paradox of the American dream. This is what the protagonist really is grappling with, the concept and the reality. Right? So the expectations and the reality, you could say. Bottom line, and my impressions right here, I think, what I want to say mainly is that this book was just a very pleasant surprise for me. I found so much here that resonated with me, as an immigrant, but also a lot of new things for me because I was not aware, for example, of the Filipino American experience, specifically the immigrants from the Philippines and their experience of the US, of moving here. The book is also very well written. It has a very personal, wonderful style. The only reservation that I have about it is probably with part 4, because I felt that part 4 seemed to drag a little bit when I was reading it. And I also found there some abstract rhetoric that did not make a lot of sense to me. But overall, I'm going to say that this book is one that I would recommend to everybody. And if you're interested in the experience of immigrants, especially in the experience of immigrants here in the US, then I would say even better. I think you should read this book, and I think you're going to find a lot here that is going to be to your liking and of your interest. Do you have any questions, comments, recommendations, recipes? Just let me know. Those were my 2 cents on America is in the Heart by Carlos Bulosan. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for stopping by, and have a wonderful day.